tonight. I do have members of the coalition, leaders, and community activists as well that will be talking about quickly about what we'll be doing from the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform Finance and Policy Division Committee testimony debrief, where we'll talk about the bills that we had a hearing on and on Thursday, and then also talking about kind of like where do we go from here. We did have two bills that were heard on this previous Thursday or yesterday. One of them was ending qualified immunity, House File 1104, as well as requiring access to body-worn camera footage within 48 hours for any police critical incidents, and that's House File 1103. And tonight I do have members of the coalition joining us tonight. I'd like to invite you all to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, go ahead. Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm the president of Communities United Against Police Brutality, and I testified on the bill that would require body-worn camera footage to be released in 48 hours. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, my name is Jonathan McClellan. I'm the president of Minnesota Justice Coalition, and I testified on qualified immunity, ending qualified immunity, and the 48-hour bill.
And I'm Zainab Mohammed, and I'm the Community Advocacy Manager with CARE Minnesota.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you three, for joining us today. And first of all, the amount of work that has been going into all of these bills, alongside with, other leaders as well, like Tashira herself, talking about Jess from TCC4J, we're talking about Nakima and so many others as well that have been, and Jaylani, of course, that have been, putting in a lot of work in terms of not only providing community response, but really the brain and the heart behind, all the work that we're seeing around the city. And Thursday was really a historic moment that we have, participated in, and it was really Minnesota history because of not only the reaction, but also the progress that was made. And Michelle, if I could maybe have you start a little bit in terms of when it comes to testimony, and you've testified, you have 20 plus years of experience, and you've testified, behind so many other bills. Was Thursday any different? And kind of like, what was your analysis from Thursday's testimony?
Well, first of all, what we were talking about was giving family members, not the general public, but family members, access to body-worn camera footage within 48 hours of the incident that took their family member's life away. And it's a common sense bill, and it's not even shouldn't be anything controversial, because right now a large set of data is already available to members of the public in the immediate aftermath of a police critical incident. And so basically that information is already available, and only body camera footage is like the exception to that information, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to level up body camera footage the same as the rest of the data that already is public. And so that's, that was all we were trying to do. And, I have to tell you that the mood in the committee was quite a bit different than I'd ever seen before. The cops on the committee, and there were several, were absolutely, wound up. They were like, oh my gosh, how can we protect ourselves from you people? And, they were all talking about how, this is a public safety issue. No, it's an issue of police cover-up. It's not, how do you increase public safety by not making the data available to the community? One of the things I tried to point out to them is that if there had not been bystander footage, that George Floyd's family would not have known what happened to him at this time. And it is about the cops crafting a narrative, because when George Floyd was killed, you all will remember that that while that video was being shown all over Facebook and people saw a man get the life crushed out of him, at the same time, John Elder, the police spokesman, was on the TV telling people, we arrested a man tonight and he had a medical emergency. Well, I don't know what you looked at, but that wasn't a medical emergency to me. But for the fact that there was, bystander footage, this family would still not know what had happened to Mr. Floyd that killed him. So, I think that this is crucial, and there's not one good reason for, not one good reason for us to withhold this data, especially from the families. This is body cameras that we pay for. Our tax dollars cover them. And by the way, whoever is talking on our little live stream here, there weren't any murders that happened because of BLM or anything else, or anybody standing up for people's justice. The murders are the police and not the community. And I'm not going to listen to that nonsense. But we're going to stay focused on what we came here to talk about. And what we're asking people to do is to reach out to the legislature and demand that these bills get passed and get across the finish line. So like I said, we talked about that, and the police were utterly livid. They were so upset that we might do anything to not allow them to utterly control every part of the narrative. This was why they were fighting us tooth and nail. So, and I know, Jonathan, you've got quite a bit to talk about with how they were acting about the qualified immunity bill. It was really crazy.
Yeah, and Michelle, it was, and I think the word tooth and nail doesn't even do it justice, because they were like trying to fight with everything, including the kitchen sink, if you will, especially during the testimonies. And Jonathan, if I could just transition to you a little bit, I think one big piece to it was even the imagery that the House of Representatives were using, right, when it comes to as a tactic to intimidate, right? And can you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yes. As soon as we logged on to the call, we saw backgrounds that were reminiscent of what we saw on the 6th of January when the U.S. Capitol was stormed. You had the blue line. You had members showing pictures of all their cops on the behind them, and the way that I agree with Michelle. The way that they came at the bills was very childish, and nothing that they testified on was logical, was backed in by any facts or anything. They use the same old 1980s defenses that they've been using since the 80s, and but the backgrounds of that was just reminiscent of what we saw at the U.S. Capitol, and that wasn't that's not the type of representation I think that Minnesota needs.
If I could, just to add something real quick, you had a professor testify on this bill. There was a professor from University of St. Thomas Law School, and this man is a Federalist Society member, and he basically is, he's not like a guy I'd go out to dinner with, you know what I mean? I'm not really a fan of the Federalist Society. They're very conservative, but he said it is time for qualified immunity to end, and that this is a special kind of privilege. And first of all, it doesn't really affect the police. What it affects is the ability of people in the community to get justice when police misbehave. So the magic question you have to ask yourself is, why is it that police are so eager to defend the bad cops that engage in bad conduct? I mean, I don't believe in bad cop and good cop. I believe that it's a bad system, and I think it's a systemic thing. But at the same time, why were they so eager to give all of these cops a free pass? And the other thing is that they were like not even doing it intelligently. They were all screaming and hollering, going, well, if we don't defend cops, then we won't be able to get anybody to work for us, and blah, blah, blah. And the cities, how dare you try to make the city stop defending cops? And we're like, well, already there's a state law that requires the cities to indemnify their police officers. We're just talking about any qualified immunity, which is a judicial matter, not so much an indemnification matter. So why are they they're conflating the two, right? And they're doing this to try to convince people that who aren't knowledgeable. And it was so funny because they were raising up things like, what does color of law mean? And legal terms, and then they were like screaming at John Thompson and telling him, you're trying to end police. You're just trying to end police. It's like, it was crazy.
Right. No, and that's not what we are. Jared has a question about which committee this was. This was the Public Safety Committee, the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform Committee. Mariani, Representative Mariani, is the chair of that committee, and that's where this was heard in the House of Representatives. So if anybody has any questions that's watching, please, I encourage you to send them through your chat. We'd be happy to answer your questions and so forth. And if one of the
and before we continue, I wanted to go ahead and welcome in Jelani Hussain, who's the executive director of Minnesota. Assalamu alaikum, Jelani. How you doing?
Alaikum salam. Thanks everybody. Thanks Michelle and Jonathan and Zainab, for all of you for keeping up the fight, and for everybody who's watching. I really appreciate you. I know it's kind of late right now, but it's exceptionally important right now that we spend a little bit of time really knowing that we are embarking on a very historic piece of legislation that that would be exceptionally important, that all of us, take a little bit of a step right now to make sure that we are recognizing and we are fighting, and the law enforcement and those who don't want change are fighting back extremely hard. So I really appreciate both Michelle and Jonathan for testifying, and we're asking all of you as you're watching tonight to continue to really call on your friends and others, and legislators need to hear from you. If you really care about fight for justice for George Floyd and all these families who have had their loved ones stolen from them, and every day we are reminded. Every day we're reminded we need to do something. Just yesterday, the day before yesterday, what happened in North Minneapolis, what happened in St. Paul, police officers showing up warrior style and not peacekeepers, punching this young teenager, sucker punching him. I mean, just with deadly force, and then not enough, just on the ground, just going after him. The bills that we're proposing will have a huge impact. Qualified immunity is one of those that law enforcement has used for far too long. So again, I appreciate everybody for joining, but it's time to act. It's time for us to get these legislations passed in the House, and we're definitely going to push through the Senate and the governor, and we need everybody's support. This is a time to organize. I know on Monday, we're going to be back at court with the Chauvin trial, and everybody's going to be looking at the court seeking justice there, but we need to seek justice inside the courtroom, and we definitely need justice outside the courtroom.
Awesome. We have a question from the audience about what are the bill numbers that we testified on. One of the qualified immunity bill, it's House File 1104, and the 48-hour bill that we testified on was 1103, and both of those bills were carried by Representative John Thompson. And Michelle, I believe there's a question from Colleen about what states can you point to that have police with liability insurance?
Yes. Actually, interestingly, what most people don't realize is that the federal government already requires their agents to carry this insurance. So FBI agents have to have it. Different, kinds of agents, law enforcement agents, the Border Patrol agents, everybody that works in law enforcement in the federal arena has to have this insurance now, which is how we know that it exists and how we know what the premiums roughly cost and how this can happen. Right now, we started, actually it was our idea in Minneapolis. One of our CAPB providers, or supporters rather, came up with this idea, and it was our idea to push this to happen in Minneapolis. We were not able to get it on the ballot. We had way more signatures than we needed. We had like 19,000 signatures, and we needed like not even 7,000. And basically, we were able to get this on. We were able to get it, but then the city would not put it on the ballot. So we don't have it here in Minneapolis. We don't have it in Minnesota. We're trying to get that as one of our bills, but but they're about to pass it. They have it now in Colorado, and they're about to pass it in New York State. And if New York State takes it, this is like car insurance. Once upon a time, car insurance didn't exist. but now it does. So this will be like that same kind of thing. Once we get that to happen in a few key states, it'll flip like no tomorrow. So yes, basically, we're getting a lot of comments, you guys. We'll try to answer as quick as we can. But anyway, so this is happening. We do know that there's companies that provide this insurance. In fact, had a conference call last week with the head of one of those companies. It's very doable. And what we're at with the legislature now is we're going to try to. They wouldn't go outright for professional liability insurance. What they would go for is a study on it. And so we are happy to help with that study because there's a lot of good academic support for this concept. So thanks for asking.
Yep, and I'll just add a quick thing. If police officers can pay for insurance if they kill somebody, there's no reason why they can't pay for insurance for themselves. In case if they have some type of liability to them. On average, their insurance for that only costs between $15 and $25 a month. There's no reason why the cities and the taxpayers should be on the hook when they make mistakes and break the law, and they need to be held accountable. And the whole idea behind the insurance is just like any other insurance company. If you are a high risk individual, then you don't get insurance. If you can't get insurance, you can't get a license. If you can't get a license, you are not a police officer, and that's how it should be. So
absolutely, and I want to just say too that like I said, that we know that this is completely doable, and it's a great way in order to bring some stake into this stuff. One of the things that's happened is Minneapolis basically budgets $21 million a year for police misconduct type stuff. $21 million a year. Now, because we've had some budget problems, this last budget cycle, I think they only budgeted about $14 million a year because they were trying to cut that way back. And we knew that was nowhere near enough because we knew George Floyd's case was coming down the pike, plus a whole mess of cases where the cops, injured people seriously during the uprising. And including 5 people lost their eyes. And so we know there's big lawsuits coming down the pike and that they didn't budget enough. But the idea that we actually budget for police brutality, that's sickening to me. We ought to have these cops have a stake in these lawsuits, because we have cops that stack up lawsuits like pancakes. Rob Kroll had 11 successful lawsuits against him. We got a guy named Tyrone Barzy, a Northside Minneapolis cop, who had 7 successful lawsuits against him in the course of a year and a half. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. So we got to get the cops out of have them have a stake in some of this stuff. That's really.
And I want to take a moment quickly to recognize Hafiz. Jazakallah khair.
This is one of my friends from Ghana, and I just want to recognize him, and I appreciate Hafiz for watching. It's all the way from Ghana. I know it's probably either early morning over there, probably right after Fajr. And but again, I just wanted to show that this is a global issue. Fighting for justice for George Floyd has become a global issue, and it's important for all of us to recognize that. And here in Minnesota, the entire world is watching us. What are we going to do? We are on the clock. Can we pass meaningful legislation, and can we be the state that can really lead the nation in showing that it's possible to hold police officers accountable? And so I appreciate Hafiz. And for all of you who are watching right now, one thing you could do is share this live with others, especially if you're watching on Facebook. You can also host a watch party. That's a way to get your friends to know that you are watching. So these are a few things you could do. It's important that we need to come together now, especially with this pandemic online like this, and continue the conversation on the street, off the street. And now we have to take our message to the Capitol, not the physical Capitol, but the leadership right now. And so we need you to make a call. We need you to take the action. Mohammed, if you can share that again, the link. We need you to do that right now. It's simple. It takes less than 2 minutes. Last time we were on the air for less than 30 minutes, and we had nearly 100 people that responded, that immediately let their legislators know that they care about these issues, and they stood up. So please, let's do that, and let's continue to fight.
Awesome. And next I want to talk about, and I want to go ahead and maybe answer Rashad's question regarding on how many proposed bills do we have, and if we can post a link to the legislation that's being referred. Brother, I'll go ahead and I will post the link in the chat here, and then maybe Zainab, if you are able, could you maybe go through and let us like what these bills are, and I'll pull them up live here. Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 9 bills that we've proposed so far, and 6 have made it through the committee. I'm just pulling them up to talk about it.
I think it's an important thing to say is that these bills are all very common sense bills. They're all things, and they're not like Jonathan likes to say all the time. They're not silver bullets. They're not going to end violent policing, but they're going to increase accountability, make cops think twice about it, and make it easier for families to get justice. And these are things that are a very, very important start. We have further to go, but in the state where George Floyd was killed, we cannot get our bills across the finish line because we have guys like Warren Limmer stopping us from doing that. And by the way, somebody asked for his contact information. We really need people to be jamming up his email and Paul Gazelka's email. And one of the things that somebody told me recently is that if they get like 40 or 50 emails about something, they really pay attention to it. So for Senator Loomer, it's SEN, because all of them start with SEN. So SEN.Warren, WARREN, .Limmer, LIMMER, at Senate.mn. So that all of those, and then Paul Gazelka is the same thing. Sen, SEN.PAUL.GAZELKA at Senate.mn. So that's how you reach those folks. And how do you get things across the finish line? By telling them that's your expectation and bugging them and just hammering on them. And so we are only the people that, our leadership and our groups or whatever are the size that we are. We need the rest of the public to get involved with us and help us, get this across the finish line. This is so incredibly important. Oh, and somebody did ask about police critical incident. A police critical incident means an incident in which deadly force is used. Basically, it means an incident in which a person either dies or sustains substantial bodily harm. So either deadly force or like car accidents, things like that.
Right.
So to quickly kind of go over the bills. So one of our bills is to end the statute of limitations for lawsuits for wrongful death caused by police. And this bill has been laid over to the omnibus and did make it out of the Public Safety Committee. The second bill is strengthening civilian oversight. This bill would allow civilian oversight committees to actually have the ability to subpoena and to actually have investigatory bodies. And this bill strikes language in the legislature that currently takes away and does not allow civilian oversight boards or committees to have that power. The next bill is ending police-only response to mental health crisis calls, and this bill was voted out of the Public Safety Committee, and actually is headed to the House floor for a vote. Next is ending qualified immunity, and this bill is one of the bills that we heard yesterday, and this bill will be headed to Judiciary Finance for a hearing as well. The next is independent investigatory and parliamentary body for critical incidents. And unfortunately, this bill we weren't able to get to during this session, but hopefully we'll be continuing the process for the next session. The next bill that we worked on is ending prosecution for reporting police misconduct. And this bill currently is going to strike language that criticizes reporting police misconduct, and 100% of the individuals that were prosecuted or brought charges against with this legislation have 100% been Black. The next bill that made it out of committee is also ending no-knock warrants, and we were able to get this out of the committee, passed out of the committee the day before Breonna Taylor's anniversary. Next is requiring police to carry professional liability insurance. This is one of the bills that we heard on Thursday, and we're able to get this out of the Public Safety Committee and is going to be headed to the Judiciary Finance Committee. And next is requiring access to bodies worn um, camera footage in police critical incidents within 48 hours. And this bill is also voted out of the Public Safety Committee and will be heard in Judiciary Finance. And we're working on getting a date for that. So this is what the action alert looks like. If you dial the number 8-612-200-2550, you'll get a link directly to this page. And if you scroll down, it's actually lists all of the bills. And if you go in and you fill out all of your information, you hit next, it will take you to a pre-filled message. And then once you go to the pre-filled message, this will actually send a message to all of your legislators. And then all you have to do is confirm. And this entire process takes less than 2 minutes, and you'll be able to go ahead and send an email out to all of your legislators that represent you.
Something we should mention, and that's this. One of the things that people don't realize is like the laws are made by the people that are there, right? And we know that we can't be at the legislature in person because back in the old days you just go there, right? But it means you need to be present in the way of sending emails, making those phone calls, taking these actions that we're asking you to do, and they're simple, right? Simple things that you can do. But honestly, if the Minnesota legislature, because they don't get that much, believe it or not, that much email, especially not around a particular issue. But if a Minnesota legislator receives a bunch of emails about something, they really pay attention to it. And so people often think, I know I'm guilty of thinking things like, well, what good is this going to do? I'm just sending a petition. It doesn't even seem like much, or I'm just sending an email. But you'd be very surprised at how impressed they are when they start getting a bunch of emails on the same topic. So this is why we need you all to be there with us. Like I said, it's the ones who are there that make the laws. And so we need you to be there with us in spirit by sending those emails.
And Jonathan, one of the moments during the Public Safety Committee testimony was you talked about a particular case that kind of had everybody on the other side, if you will, kind of wound up. Can you tell us a little bit about Kane versus Behringer, and why did that make so many people uncomfortable?
Yes. In the case Kane v. Barger, it's a 2018 case from the Third Circuit. You had an officer named Shane Berger who was dispatched to a hospital to interview a sexual assault victim. As part of that process, the physician had already taken photographs of the victim's injuries during the medical examinations. During the interview, Barger instructed the victim to come to the police department with the clothes she was wearing at the time of the assault. Upon the arrival of the police department, Barger took the victim alone to the back room and photographed intimate areas of her body. The victim claimed that Barger touched her upper chest, her buttocks, as he photographed her with a personal cell phone. The officer questioned the victim about her breasts, her vagina, her buttocks, and persistently asking whether she would sustain injuries to her vagina. Though she repeatedly denied having visible injuries, Barger's relentless questioning led her to show her vagina to him. Barger, the officer, initially lied to investigators about using his cell phone to photograph the victim. After further questioning, he admitted he had lied, explaining he didn't want his girlfriend to be jealous of the photos. The officer was disciplined for violating department policy, and he received a 2-week suspension. And the victim sued the officer, alleging he touched her and photographed her for his own gratification. The district court granted qualified immunity to the officer, ruling that the right to be free from violation of bodily integrity was not clearly established. And when you're talking about qualified immunity, it's important to understand that clearly established law does not mean a statute that has been passed by the legislature. Clearly established law means looking at a particular case where there's similar context and conduct that matches the case that you're presenting before the court. And in order to surmount a challenge to the qualified immunity, you have to allege specific facts or a specific factual background that matches the same context and conduct as the previous case. And there's only been, as far as I know, one case that has ever been able to mount a challenge to that, and that was a case where where some prison officials held a man's arms over his head for 7 hours, and in the hot summer sun, and put a bowl of water and let their dogs drink it in front of him. And that's the only case that I'm aware of that has surmounted a challenge to qualified immunity. So in essence, if a case comes before the court and it's not doesn't have the same facts, where the cops held their arms over their head or and put a bowl of water for a dog to drink, that level of cruelty, it's not going to get heard. And the downside of that is that the courts don't get to an opportunity to judge the constitutionality of the claim. They make a decision based on whether or not the case matches that case, and if it doesn't, it's dismissed, and that's unfortunate. But like one of the testifiers, Professor Gregory Sisk, said that it doesn't matter what side of the law, political spectrum you are in the legal field. This is one area of law that is believed that it has been wrong from day one. And the thing of it is that when we realize that things are wrong, we're supposed to take steps to fix them. And this is a law that was enacted, or not a law. It's a common law. It was judge-made law, judicial activism, that was enacted in 1967, a year before the assassination of Dr. King. And it is what it is today. And that's what we're trying to fight against. It's important to note that the U.S. House of Representatives in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act did pass a version of this and a qualified immunity component as part of that bill, and we're waiting to see what happens there. But we have to fight here in Minnesota too to protect our population here in Minnesota from qualified immunity as well. So, and that's what we're doing.
Jonathan, can you mention that there's other states that have already done this?
Yep, there's other states that have already done this, and I think that's the rub that we all get, because we're ground zero. This is the match. Minnesota is the match that sparked this outpouring of consciousness in our community, and we have failed the state of Minnesota when it comes to passing any meaningful criminal justice reform measures that gets at the heart of these issues. And we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to continue to push in both in the legislature, in the House and the Senate, and in the governor's office, and until we get the justice and the legislation and the change that we really demand, that the people demand, and that we need to ensure that our future is not robbed of any more lives.
Absolutely. If I could, one of our viewers is Rashard Zanders, and Rashard was actually our plaintiff. The Minnesota Statute 609.505, subdivision 17. That is a statute basically that criminalizes the so-called false reporting of police brutality. And at the time that we fought it for 3 years and tried to keep it from passing, and then they threw it into this omnibus bill at the last possible minute and passed it at the 11th hour when we couldn't stop it. And basically, we ended up suing on this bill because it's a First Amendment violation. It's a grotesque First Amendment violation. And so we sued on this bill. And Rashard was one of the plaintiffs in our suit because he's a journalist. And he would have been, because the law reads like this: if you so-called falsely report police brutality, or if you cause it to be reported, you could be prosecuted. And Rashard was a journalist with Minnesota's Spokesman Recorder and other newspapers, and he could have easily been prosecuted for this. I was one of the other plaintiffs because I wrote the newsletter for our organization. And the interesting part of the statute is that it's not about false reporting. It's about if the agency that you complain about, they're the ones that decided that your complaint is false. They're the ones that get to decide that. And if they decide that your complaint's false, they prosecute you. And not only can you go to prison for this, because it's a gross misdemeanor, but you could also be required to pay a $3,000 fine that to pay for their investigation. And like I said, and it's the department you're complaining about that decides that you complained falsely. So they've got a huge stake in this whole thing, right? And so we were working with a woman who was being prosecuted for it. Like I told you, 100% of the people that have been prosecuted under this are African American. And we were working with a woman who was being prosecuted for it after she had been sexually assaulted by a cop, provably sexually assaulted by a cop. She was being prosecuted for it. And we were people who could potentially be prosecuted for it. And the judge ruled that she should just take up her problem at the criminal justice system and don't worry the courts about it. And we didn't have standing because we weren't already being prosecuted. This is the ridiculousness. We took it all the way up to the appeals court and the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court twisted themselves into a pretzel to try to say why this was not a First Amendment issue, when criticizing police is, in fact, a First Amendment issue. And so this is an important bill. And I wanted to just point out to Richard to let you know that your work did not go in vain, because we are pushing very hard to overturn that bill. And we've been working on this for quite a long time, and we're just going to keep hammering at it until we get rid of this horrible bill, because literally every single person that's been prosecuted, every single person that's had any consequences because of this bill has been black. 100%.
Right. And I just want to mention one more thing about qualified immunity, just to give people some context. Qualified immunity is not a law created by an elected body such as Congress or a state legislator. And it's the duty of an elected body to enact law and the courts to interpret the law. And this has happened in our history before, where the courts invented a doctrine that harmed and now protect a class of people. And the reason why I'm going here is because we're starting to see legislation pop up around the country that's reminiscent of the Jim Crow era. So I think it's important to point this piece out with judicial activism and specifically qualified immunity and our history. United States Chief Justice Roger Taney invented a doctrine called substantive due process, which was a complete contradiction in terms, and used it to extend slavery throughout all of the U.S. territory. Chief Justice Taney was known for one of the worst court decisions in U.S. history in the Dred Scott case. And as a result of that case, with other events that were happening back in the 1860s, the elected officials had to enact legislation, and they rose to the challenge and enacted the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So here we are, where we're facing another piece of judicial activism legislation that was not enacted by a legislative body. It's court judge-made law. And again, we all know what was going on back in the 1960s, and we all know what happened in 1968. And this bill and case, or this common law was created by the courts in 1967, and it's long overdue. So when we see the lack of accountability, the shields that continuously hide police misconduct and cover it up, and you have to ask, well, where is this all stemming from? And you just look back at the 60s and what was going on back then during the Jim Crow era. And even before that, and you'll see that this has its roots very deep within that movement, the civil rights movement. So
most definitely, and finally, I'd like to say that we're going to quickly wrap up here. But with these bills, we understand that these bills are not silver bullets, but they begin to tear down the deck that has been stacked against us for so many decades and years. So. Again, if you'd like to go ahead and support these bills, if you have not so far, please text the number 8 to 612-200-2550, and you will get a link to the action alert that would then allow you to just fill in your name and your information, and you will have a pre-written letter sent out on your behalf, or an email sent in on your behalf to all of the legislators that represent you in your district, as well as some government officials as well. From the governor's office also. So again, I'd like to thank Michelle, I'd like to go ahead and thank you as well, Jonathan, for joining us this evening, and to everybody that joined us to give us a little bit of your Friday night to come and hang out with us a little bit and get an update from all of us. There will be an action that is planned on March 29th, so please visit CCCAJ's page as well as any of our pages as well to get more information on that. And then as well, we'll continue to periodically pop up just like this, provide all of you with some updates on our bills, and also if there are any planned actions also. So again, I want to thank you, Michelle. I want to thank you, Jonathan, for being up in us tonight. And for you all, have a great and wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you.